Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Defiance Daily, the Defiance Daily Show here at Defiance Press and Publishing. We've got our author Candace Esham on the line with us. Candace, thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself and tell people who you are.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's an honor, and I'm grateful to be one of your authors. And my name is Candace Esham, and I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. Have my MBA, and my passion is in regulatory compliance. I decided to write my book based off of my grandmother's story. Unfortunately, we lost her from neglect during the COVID pandemic, but I started an advocacy campaign and was able to get 6 laws successfully passed for improving change in the long-term care industry. And my book is Locked Out: Elder Neglect and the Keys to Change.
Awesome.
We were introduced to you. You reached out to us. You've written a wonderful book. And I say wonderful book. It's a great book. It's an unfortunate topic.
Mm-hmm.
And can you tell us a little bit about your book? Why you wrote the book? What was your motivation, and what are you hoping that this book leads to?
Sure. So I wanted to honor my Memom with her legacy, talking about how beautiful of a person she was, also describing the tragic circumstances that led to her death, and then tying that into what I believe is a national crisis for this neglect. So that basically my book is in, I would say, like 3 phases. One, getting to know my grandmother, Memom, her story. And the second part is highlighting how it's going across nationally. I tried to do advocacy on my own, and that's what I feel like a lot of people do. They get some energy, they try to figure it out, but going alone and trying to just share your story, you think, gosh, I wouldn't want anybody else to go through what your grandmother's going through. Let's do something about it. That's not my experience. That wasn't what happened. But luckily, I'm a professional in regulatory compliance. So I said, let me come up with a strategy with a team. There's plenty of people out there who have experienced something. And let me give specific benchmarking, actual laws, see what we need to work on first. And so that's why I chose the 6 laws with the legislators. We collectively chose those to make the most impact the fastest. And what I want people to take away from my book is, no matter what your passion is, whatever you're trying to work on, if you have a good strategy of networking, negotiating, research, and a good team, you will be able to make a difference. And so I highlight those strategies in the back third of my book so that hopefully, no matter what you're passionate and interested in, you can learn how the government process can impact your daily life and how you can have a voice.
That was a great answer and a really good question there, Mark.
Come up with them every once in a while, Travis.
Pretty good.
Every once in a while, bro.
Pretty good at this. Pretty see it. Okay.
I was just going to say that is Travis and I were actually just talking about that. We were talking about that before our podcast today, especially when we're approaching difficult topics and things of that nature. Obviously, this is your grandmother. So this is what happened here is a tragedy. There's no other way to describe that. However, you have a message to get out to the public about this, and you want people to hear this story. So even in a tragedy, you have to sort of approach it in a way that draws people in. And there's humorous moments or moments that maybe aren't sad.
Right.
Is this part of how you bring your story to the public?
Yeah, thanks. One of the main things is my Memom, how I call her, my grandmother. She was actually a nurse who specialized in geriatric care. And so she would always tell me about her residents that she worked with. And she retired at the age of 68 only because she wanted to travel. So she had a very long nursing career and really loved working with that type of patient and resident, and always upheld the highest ethics and reported people if she needed to. And so when you're negotiating and working with stakeholders in the long-term care industry or other medical providers or people that you need to convince we need to do better, I think that her being a nurse, and I literally have her scrapbook from her nursing days. This was likely before HIPAA, so she has her patient pictures and names and all the events that they did. That's something that is a common uplifting ground to say we can get here. She had appropriate training, staffing levels, good standards. And if you talk to anybody who has ever worked with her, they'll say she's the model nurse. So that's something uplifting. And she, as a human, always saw the best in people. And so I try to channel her character and mindset whenever I'm approaching, a difficult subject. She was wearing her colored glasses always. So,
Oh, that's really good. So, I mean, and given her background and what had happened, I mean, a tragedy to say the least. But
Yeah. So, and first of all, I think what's interesting about this dynamic of this interview and your book is that it's number one, it is a celebration of your grandmother and her accomplishments. One of the things that I found fascinating is that she was her involvement as a cadet nurse in World War II.
mhm.
And I was at the grocery store yesterday or the day before in Mahia, Texas. And there was a gentleman there and he had a World War II Korea hat on. I'm going, World War II. And he's 101 years old.
wow,
Mhm.
And I got to meet him, shake his hand. And I just said, wow, I was kind of blown away. I should have gotten a picture with him and I didn't. I missed out on that. But this generation today, we're very interested in the World War II generation, the greatest generation, the people that did that. And your grandmother was part of that. Please, can you expand on that some? Because that's really, I think, maybe a foundational
Sure.
place about where she came from and her values.
Sure. And it actually led to the cover design, which we can get into. She was very patriotic, always loved America. She grew up in Toccoa, Georgia, on a sharecropper's farm. And, she didn't have a lot of opportunity there. So one day she went to the movies and there was an advertisement for cadet nursing program at Emory University in Georgia. And she said, I'm going to apply. I'm going to do it. And nobody even dropped her off at the train station. Her mother died when she was 3 years old, post childbirth. And so she was very independent. And when she set her mind on something, she was going to make it happen. And so she graduated from Emory University. The need for cadet nurses was ended right about the time she graduated. So she didn't end up actually serving in the war, but she was ready to be able to do that if the opportunity provided that for her. And so she actually ended up marrying my grandfather. He was in the Army Air Corps and flew 58 missions in World War II. So her whole life was built around, being very patriotic and loving America and just being a good human. So I definitely believe that they are the greatest generation. I didn't get to meet my grandfather, but I could tell you my Memom they broke the mold when they made her.
What do you know about your Mom before World War II? What was her what was her childhood like? What was her life's experience? You mentioned it was in Georgia.
Mhm.
I'm just fascinated by this generation of people. I really am. I'm just generally fascinated.
Sure.
Can you give us color us a picture here of how your grandmother grew up and the family that she came from that produced this amazing human being?
Mhm. Yeah. So, her mom was a teacher before she got married. In that time, once you get married, you don't work any longer. So, my grandmother was the oldest of two. And so, like I said, they lived on a sharecropper's farm, never owned any land, but always worked it. and grew up in the Great Depression. And she, always felt like they didn't even realize there was a depression going on because they were
Wow.
so poor. But she always had food, always had a roof over her head, and always, very blessed in that way. And she would say she was blessed. And so, when her mom gave birth to her sister, she ended up dying, I think, about 10 days after childbirth,
Mm.
because she died from sepsis, which is actually what my grandmother died from. So she died from the same thing her mom did. And so her little sister actually went in town to live with her aunts. And my grandmother, she stayed on the farm with her dad. And her dad never remarried. So her grandmother moved in. So she had a very family oriented life, but never really grew up with a mom. But a lot of people could say, could take that as an excuse to have a bitter outlook on life, but that was never her. Her personality was always kind, very religious. One thing that's funny is her dad was never liked anyone to play cards or any kind of games. So she grew up, very strict rules. And so that was one of the things that she loved, even into her older years, playing Yahtzee, bingo, cards, anything you could compete at. That was her thing. She played golf until she was in her 80s, even got a hole in one, played tennis into her 70s. And so always competitive, but in a kind way. And so I think that her challenges really um, shaped her character. She lost her first husband. They met at Emory University. They were there together. He died from Hodgkin's his
Mm.
1 year after they were married. So she was in her early 20s and lost her first husband. And then eventually met my grandfather. And she just was always kind and uh, went to church every Sunday. She liked it if she could go to church twice on Sundays. And that was one of the things in her assisted living facility, why she chose to live there. It was about an hour away from either my parents or myself, but it was close to her church. So she went to Christ Episcopal Church, and there was a shuttle from the assisted living facility to that church. So she felt very independent even there. And Christ was always, a foundation for her, and important to her.
Can you talk a little more about whenever the assisted living center was identified? Can you walk us through the process of how that specific place was identified? Um, what were the things that she liked about it? What were some of the promising kind of aspects to it, at least from the outside looking in?
Mhm.
When you're going through and selecting places like this for someone like your grandma.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I focus on now after knowing, kind of what we didn't know at the time in this election. So some of the things that are kind of easier, you would think, to identify are how many complaints are there, what
Mm.
are some of the injuries, cost obviously is a component. For her, proximity to some of her friends and the church. She grew up, or she didn't grow up. When my grandfather retired at Dover Air Force Base, that's where they built their home, in the Dover Air Force Base community area. So she wanted to stay there because she had a lot of friends. Now, family wasn't necessarily close, but she was very active in the community, volunteered. And so we looked, did a Google search and looked to see, are there any complaints on this facility? There were none at the time. Now knowing that those aren't always easy to identify, in Delaware, they're not very transparent with the incident type. They only put up the most recent survey. They don't really do metrics on how many incidents, the type of incidents. That's something that you have to use the Freedom of Information Act process to be
Mm.
able to obtain. And so that's one of the things that is important in my book to share with people, some of the tools that you can use to even find out about facilities. So hopefully your family hasn't experienced neglect, but here's some of the things, we wish we would have known, and now we know how to find that. There's something that's called the chandelier effect. It's a terminology where newer facilities, they literally have a chandelier in the hallway. They might have nice flooring or a big piano in the lobby,
Yeah.
but you walk in there and you see no residents, no activities. Everybody's isolated in their rooms, which isolation, even outside of the pandemic, is terrible for anybody, let alone somebody aging. And so, um, we got sold on the activities that were happening there that we thought, and a lack of incidents that we were able to find on the public web.
Now, when after getting into the process itself, were there, knowing what you know now, or really before even knowing what you know now, were there any initial red flags um, that you experienced or some of your family experienced um, that you'd like to share maybe to other folks that are pretty new to this?
Mhm.
I've got a grandma, and we've got a pretty good grasp on what we're going to do. I'm hesitant to put them in anything remotely close to this stuff. You're speaking out of, Delaware. I don't know how it is down here in Texas, but some of the stories that I was looking up earlier, a lot of them were happening here. It is
Mhm.
pretty. But anyway, my point being, what are some of the red flags you had noticed early on that give you an indication that something might be amiss here?
Sure. So there were a couple key incidents, I would say, near misses, if you will, that happened even before being locked out in the pandemic. And one of the things that I think allowed them to be near misses, even though, my grandmother shouldn't have had to suffer through them, but we never had more than 2 days where some of our family members, either me, myself, my brother, my mom, or some of her friends from church, or anybody who knew her personally, she always had visitors. But there were two incidents. One, I went to her room to pick her up to take her to lunch, and she said her back was itching, and it was itching really bad. I pull up the back of her shirt, and she had shingles, and
Mm.
nobody identified that. And one of her accommodations was help getting dressed every day. So if you're helping her get her blouse on or
Right.
watching her get a shower, I mean, it was all across her back, and
Oh,
it's very distinct rash. If you're working in a healthcare environment, you would know what shingles looks like. So she never complained. That's one of the things about her rosy personality.
Right.
Having said that, I feel like when you're paying $9,000 a month to have somebody help you get dressed and get a shower and provide you a meal, that somebody would check into, hey, I think we should get that looked at and we should get you some medication. So that's something that I identified, and I went down to the nursing station. This was a couple years before the pandemic. And I basically was like, I feel like this is something you should have caught, but I didn't really push it hard because I knew how much she loved being there and her friends. And a second time, she did have another foot wound that my mom actually noticed when she put her shoes on, my grandmother's shoes on. She winced really severely in pain. And so there was a pressure wound there, which is a form of neglect. They should not have pressure wounds.
mm.
Uh, there's a lot of misconceptions around that, oh, somebody's old, they might have less, circulation, so it's okay. No, it's not okay to have wounds
Right.
in any environment. And so there was actually reported to the state. It's a requirement if you have a certain stage wound, and she had to go to the hospital. It's a regulation in Delaware where if you have a stage 3 or 4 wound and you go to the hospital, the facility has to report that to the state. They send out an investigator, which they did. And my grandmother actually carried his business card around because he said, call me anytime. And she didn't want to pursue a full investigation because she liked where she lived. So there's a big fear of retaliation. And there's been research that retaliation actually does happen. So, I've had families call me and or email me. I don't really know how they found me, but they found my group and they basically say, should I call the police? And they describe their situation where they found their loved one, bloody, soaked in urine, that kind of thing, and say, should I call the police? And, as an individual contributor, that's a very tough, situation to try to help them navigate. But that's the kind of mindset where people think that it's something they did wrong
Right.
rather than a facility doing something wrong. So I do
And
regret some not reporting and going into that further. I try to encourage people to do that anonymously now, because if the state doesn't know, something as simple as an elevator being broken for months. Imagine a 90-year-old lady on the third floor of a facility not being able to use an elevator to come down to get dinner.
oh, and especially if there's an accident involved with coming down the stairs.
Mhm.
Now, as far as can you expand a little bit on the retaliation? Have you seen um, any examples of this with what you're working through now? And what are do you have any examples, like I said, of some of these retaliation efforts?
Mhm.
And who does the retaliation? Who retaliates?
Sure. I mean, I have some examples throughout my grandmother's story. Some I found in her journals after the fact. She, as a nurse, she liked to take notes even into her 90s, and she kept a journal every day of things she did, but never told us exactly what was going on. So at her facility, they had at one point scheduled her showers on Tuesdays and Saturdays. You get a shower 2 days a week. That's it. That's all they have resources for. And so Saturdays, usually either our family, a friend, she was very social. And Saturday nights, she was out. She was going out and doing something either with us. So she wanted to enjoy time out at a restaurant, hearing music, social things. And she would miss her shower on Saturday night. So now you're down to one night a week of a shower.
Mm,
And she asked them, can I switch my nights? Because you have to keep in mind, not everybody is as social as my grandmother was. Not everybody had family locally. So why not be able to switch her to,
Right.
Monday and Thursday where we have to work and we might not be able to get her out as much? She asked, and she wrote in her journal that she was screamed at for switching her days, for asking to switch her days.
So this being yelled at by one of the caregivers, that's you've got it. Okay.
Yeah, so that's an example. I mean, I was personally yelled at um, when I was trying to get access to my grandmother visitation during COVID. This was their lead nurse, came out, basically shoved an email in my face and said, we know that you reported us to corporate and they're not going to do anything. So there's some pretty hostile things that happen, and variation. You have to keep in mind, like, this was my grandmother's home
Right.
basically, and you always want to feel safe at your home. And if you bring up a concern and you feel like you're going to get yelled at or retaliated against, then eventually you don't say anything.
Yeah. I mean, total normal mafia type behavior for a nursing home.
can I ask a question
Yeah,
real
yeah,
quick?
go ahead.
Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt
No,
you,
you're
but I
good.
just want to one step back. You were talking about an issue or a situation, and somebody asked, "Well, did you call the police?" Right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Is isn't the police or the authorities, what if you found evidence, if you showed up at your nursing home of your loved one and you saw obvious signs of neglect or abuse, would you not call the police?
I really haven't heard many people actually call the police. In fact, most of the time they don't even want to report it to the state. So I publish a monthly newsletter to anybody who needs help navigating the process, and that's one of the things that I talk through in my book is like it should be easier to understand how to do better. And I had to figure that out the hard way, basically. And so anything I can do to help a family who's in a panic mode try to figure out how to get help faster for their loved one, I share the links to that and offer that. But that family did not end up calling the police. They, reported it to the nurse, but I didn't hear that anything really was changed. They didn't report it to the state. So that's one of the things that was challenging in this process is there are a lot of complaints. And when I started the News Journal article with the investigative reporter, the backlog of complaints was huge and the lack of inspections was crazy. And so you have to figure this is like the tip of the iceberg, basically. Very few people understand how to file a complaint and feel like they're not going to get retaliated in. So this is maybe, 10% of the actual incidents that are happening. And you have to figure not everybody has family, not everybody has family who's involved and know what's going on. And so I've asked some police officers sometimes about different incidents and kind of what they would be able to do. And there's really not a lot of laws that are there to protect people who are residents. It's not like, children at a daycare where you would think you would be able to call for abuse. One of the laws I worked on actually was a consumer fraud protection bill where dementia care facilities claim they do certain things, provide certain care, and you have no recourse. The attorney general can't do anything when a loved one is injured because you're no longer providing that care that you signed a contract on.
Okay. The reason I ask, and I used to be a cop. As a cop, if I would have gotten a phone call about,
I know where you're going with this.
A neighbor, somebody called me about their neighbors and they said they're neglecting their dog.
Oh, yeah.
I would go if I saw, this is neglect. I'm arresting the owner of the dog right there.
Mhm.
Now this is for a dog or
Mhm.
a litter of kids. And I'm not saying you should do that. So
Right.
that's not what I'm saying is if I would have responded to a horse or a dog or some cats or whatever.
I think that's your phone vibrating. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. And there is neglect. I'm arresting the owner. So
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I'm clear in understanding this, Candace, because this is I think this is important. And I've never thought about this until you said that. If I have a loved one, or even if I don't have a loved one, and let's just say I'm going to an old folks home, a retirement home or something like this, and I'm going in on Sunday to call the bingo or play my guitar and sing a song or whatever. And I'm going, and something's off here, man. They smell like urine, or
Mhm.
there appears to be something happening here. And if I call the police, what you're telling me is, and I know every situation is different or whatever, and depending on but it's possible that the police are like, well, there's not a whole lot we can do.
Yes.
That's unbelievable.
Well,
it really is. A lot of people don't realize that.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it's harder to have lawsuits are very challenging. Where I talked about pressure wounds, people saying, "Well, that's an expected outcome. Your vascular system isn't as good." I don't buy that. I don't buy that we should let people's feet rot off.
Right.
That's
Do you
not.
think-
We don't let that with, like you said, with dogs.
Right.
Dogs, it's a federal offense if you abuse a dog. It's not a federal offense if you abuse somebody in an assisted living
A
facility.
human being.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy.
See, and one question I do want to ask, and I know we've talked about this before in previous conversations, but do you think there's a cultural aspect to, a lot of uh, the reporting capability and holding some of these people accountable and chalking it up to, well, they're just old, that's just what is part of it. It's a way different generation. I'm glad we started it out with going through the background there. It's two wildly different generations in the
Mhm.
culture towards the elderly. Do you think that plays a factor in a lot of this?
Yeah, I really think the sanctity of life and the right to age with dignity. I hear that in the legislative hearings that I go to. I've heard legislators say in public forums on record that this is an impossible solution, and I don't buy that it's impossible to treat people well. I don't buy that it's impossible to train staff and have appropriate staffing resources so that they can take care and treat people with dignity. I know they can because my grandmother did it. And so
Right.
that's one of the unique things about the facility she worked at is state owned. It's a state facility that is basically the last resort where you don't have any other family and you have to be rejected by every other facility in the state to be able to qualify for there. However, they have better staffing ratios because they're state funded and
Right.
they have mandatory training. And it's just a better model. And I've talked with people in other states. And I know we talked, I don't think any state does it great, but I think there are facilities who have better models where they invest in appropriate staffing. They get people training on dementia, on wound care, best practices for all of that. And they've had success. Their bed census is up. And I want good places to be successful because I don't think we can survive as a society without these homes necessarily for some people. But I do think that there's this vision that, you know, their good days are over. And I don't think that that's how it was with my grandmother, especially knowing her, reading her journals. She loved watching Phillies baseball. She watched every game. I mean, she carried my brother's wedding invitation in her purse, and unfortunately she didn't make it. He got married, that June, and she passed away in February. She had 2 dresses ready for the wedding. She had not given up on life, but people gave up on her. And I remember even in the hospital, a nurse accosted me saying, "How dare you make her do not resuscitate?" And I said, "Well, that was her decision. She's clear of mind as to what medical care that she wants." And she was a geriatric nurse. And so she laid that out. And so even at the end days, there was one nurse, and I talk about him in my book, Tyler, who I believe is an angel. My grandmother, Memom, was not conscious at that time. And so she never spoke a word to him, but he asked me questions about her so that he could know who she was, even though he felt like she was going to die within the next 2 days. So in my book, I try to celebrate the people who did, they didn't look at her as 96 or, about to die. But there's definitely, I would say, discrimination, if you will,
Sure.
against people who are aged and, they just are like throwaways and not valuable to society anymore.
Hmm.
Um,
Which used to be the opposite, right?
right.
Elders used to be held to the utmost respectable position in culture in all kinds of civilizations. And now today it's you look at it as, oh, you don't want to get old. And nobody wants to get old. Everybody looks at it all just, siphon them off. So they get written off.
Mhm.
And then this attitude obviously it bleeds out into places for assisted living. Is that a fair statement, or what are your thoughts on my statement there?
I do. I have some friends who are in nursing school, and part of their rotations are to try different nursing environments. So they might try pediatric nursing. They might try going into an assisted living facility. I also have friends who are certified nursing assistants, CNAs, which are very common in facilities. And I do think it takes a special person to want to work in that environment,
Mhm.
and
Right.
appreciate, the challenges, but also appreciate the beautiful moments about, hearing about World War II stories, or, hearing about their travels. There was a lady across the hallway from my grandmother. She grew up in Munich, Germany, and she had to evacuate during World War II. And so there's just a wealth of, history and life that they have lived, that when you're around them and you appreciate it, you just want to soak it up. And so what the common comments I've heard, though, is um, when the staff is in those environments, they have, a passion, but they don't feel supported. And so they might not have enough staff members to be able to do the job that they think needs to happen. If somebody needs to have a shower because of something happening, and you have to stick to the 2 shower days a week, and you get challenged on being able to help somebody with that, that kind of thing, not feeling like you can do a good job. I don't care what work you're in. That's not rewarding. And so I think it's a big combination. And that's why the bills that I worked on are to try to help support the staff who work in these facilities, so that they can have training, they can have, the appropriate staff members to support. But I definitely think that unless somebody has gone through, a neglect experience with their family, people don't recognize how pervasive it is. And, I've heard people say, like, how old was your grandmother? That's a question that kind of still, is challenging, because it doesn't matter how old she was if she died
Yeah.
very
Why is
peacefully.
that?
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah,
well, what do you expect? She was old or
Yeah.
whatever. That's just horrible.
just
That's
writing it
Yeah.
off.
yeah.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little more about these these limitations to these resources for something like a shower? How I'm still trying to wrap my head around resources of tap water to run the showers. So it's not very, complicated, I would think, to
Yeah.
and as far as hygiene and sanitation concerns,
Mhm.
I would think that would be pretty high on the resource list to make that readily available, rather than it sound like a rationed
Rationing of yeah.
scenario for a
Mhm.
shower. Can you talk
Yeah.
more about
Yeah. So, especially in females, urinary tract infections um, are very, very dangerous for the elderly. They can make you lucid and, not understanding, can make you aggressive. It changes your whole brain chemistry, basically. And so, a part of urinary tract infection prevention is cleanliness. And so that means you need to be able to have access to a shower. Now, a lot of people who go into assisted living facilities, like my grandmother, have some kind of mobility challenge, to where they would not be able to safely shower on their own or feel comfortable that way. So these facilities have certified nursing assistants, and they are supposed to help, get people dressed, get people changed, sit in the bathroom when they're getting a shower. And so facilities, and these people only, I mean, people who work at Dunkin' Donuts make more than these people. They make like $10 an hour. Very,
Really?
that's
very
insane.
low.
Really?
Yeah, and they had to go to training. They had to go to training. So I can go
Oh,
to,
wow. That's
the
Oh,
problematic.
subway.
that's
That's problematic.
yeah, so I don't mean to interrupt, but that's
Yeah.
obviously a huge factor
Yeah.
in some of this stuff.
Mm,
People that are underpaid for doing these kind of things, and these are very benevolent things to do
Right.
in the care industry, and then you underpay them, and then Yeah, now it's starting to you're starting to get a picture here. But yeah, please continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, no, yeah. A lot of people don't realize that these are the people, in my opinion, who make the industry successful. Is your certified nursing assistants. They're the ones who are changing the adult diapers. They're the ones who are, like I said, helping people get dressed, helping people get to the dining hall, if they need, to help getting there so that they can eat. They are critical, and for some reason, facilities, even though they aren't paid very well, they don't hire enough of them. And so another thing that's interesting, in Delaware, certified nursing assistants are the only profession that gets dementia care training. Nurses are, it's not required. Physicians, it's not required. Uh,
That's weird.
Physical
That's
therapists,
That's
see, this
really
is where me and Mark start getting into the
yeah. We start okay.
it's like
Let's
that
lean to
sounds
another
like
question. This
very
is sketch.
intentional stuff, man.
right.
That's like that's
Sketch.
and it because the value of the elderly in general and the kind of the
Mhm.
whole, if you go into the history of how elderly were treated and how different countries and organizations, what is that,
Governments.
the United Nations model for a good
Mm,
citizen is a good producer
don't get
and
me started.
consumer. So
Mhm.
how do the allocate so we're talking, this was a state funded one, correct? So
Uh,
how
State required, not funded. It's a
okay.
requirement on training. So like, you know, uh, a part of your certification for whatever business license or medical license. I'm a mechanical engineer. I had to take, fluid mechanics, dynamics as a part of my curriculum. For healthcare providers, dementia care training is not required except for certified nursing assistants in Delaware.
Wow. How as far as for state run assisted care, how are resources and how is the funding and resources allocated to these different assisted care institutions?
Sure. So Delaware only has one facility, the hospital for the chronically ill. It's where my grandmother worked. There are big divisions in state government. I think anybody who can read the financial documents, and see where the money goes,
Mhm.
it's very interesting. Actually, read the bills, not read the headlines. But each year, there's a joint finance committee that has different hearings. So the Division of Health and Social Services is where this facility falls under, and specifically the Division of Services and of Aging and People with Disabilities. It's a big acronym. But basically, each year they have to ask for funding for how much staff. They're building a new facility. They had to ask money for that. And one of the things a lot of people don't understand is state budgets have to be balanced. It's not like the federal government. The federal government can have debt. We all know the debt's huge. State governments, you have to have a balanced budget every year. And so that's one of the things. That's actually the first meeting I started to get involved in, was understanding and speaking out as to where the money is going to support these facilities, both from an inspector standpoint. The state oversight of these facilities falls under that category, and so each year I speak up about making sure we have resources for that so that these facilities can have an inspection. Um, but um, but yeah, the funding varies. I will say this is probably the first year where we significantly had more family advocates than industry officials. So last year when I got 6 bills passed, we had a pretty decent amount of family advocates. But I think giving people hope of seeing success of bills being passed has made people want to get more involved, which is good because the more hands we have in this and the more voices, the harder it is to ignore. But I highly recommend people to see what your state budget is, where the money is going, and you'll see where the priorities are with the state. And I can tell you in Delaware, even though we're the top 5 aging in the nation, this governor and the last governor have not mentioned seniors at all.
That's incredible. So, as far as the priority is concerned, I mean, man, that's a bad recipe, man.
Oh, that is.
That's a bad recipe.
Mm-mm.
So, can you talk a little more about, you know, we had talked about how is it how does it fare compared to some of these private assisted living organizations? What are the differences you see, and maybe some of the pluses, maybe some of the negatives, and really just tying in overall, are a lot of the issues the same at the private run institutions compared to the state assisted? What's your opinion on that?
Sure. So in the private, there's basically 2 categories. There's what's called nonprofit organizations, as well as ones that have to answer to shareholders and are owned by private equity firms. There's a lot of research out there that has correlated significant harm to private equity firm owned
Oh, yeah.
facilities. So the nonprofit organizations, I still do not feel like they are in Delaware as good as the state run facility. They still have significant issues. A lot of the marketing. I have my master's in business, and it's always interesting to me to see the marketing tools that they use to try to convince people that their loved one would be safe there. But staffing issues. And one of the things that's interesting in this whole process was usually when you think that there's a failure in your system, you're causing harm to people, whether it's residents or staff, you'd want to say, let's pick something to work on and work on it. That's how most businesses run. They can't survive on failures, especially getting people injured. Any kind of manufacturing company, they can't have employees injured. They can't have explosions. They can't have high turnover.
Right.
But the nursing home industry, which is separate than the assisted living facility industry, the nursing home industry in the US gets $70 billion with a B of federal funds via Medicare and Medicaid every year. Every year. And so this is not the only funds they get, right? They have private pay people.
Sure.
But $70 billion goes into that industry from the government, and we are seeing harm everywhere. So
there is another side to this where, funding shouldn't be an issue, but somehow you're still not getting a quality product no matter how much money you're dumping into it.
Who's
right.
keeping an eye on the $70 billion?
I was gonna say, a lot of this is where I know the conversations get interesting given what we've seen with Doge and all these kinds of things. That's a question I wanted to ask: is were there any findings related to Doge as it relates to any of this information? Was there anything substantial to help the elderly that came out of Doge?
Unfortunately, I didn't see a ton except for, I would say, looking into Medicaid and Medicare fraud. There's a significant amount of that. We've seen that at our local hospitals. 2 of the 3 major hospital systems have both had settlements for Medicare fraud. One claiming that people were brain dead to get a certain amount of money, and they weren't. So these are like $40 million lawsuits settled in the state. So I was hopeful there would be more investigation into that. I've read the federal bill on the budget. There is one thing in there that's interesting about staffing ratios. The long-term care industry has fought tooth and nail to try to say you don't need this many nurses, CNAs, whatever the profession might be able to safely take care of people. But yet there's studies to show that there are, just like in the ICU, just like in a heart surgery. How many people you need to be successful, and there's studies that show you that in facilities. And so, unfortunately, that is on hold in the latest federal bill. However, one of the things that I want to emphasize to people is your local government can have a bigger impact on
Oh
you
yeah.
than your
Yeah.
federal government. And so a lot of people read what's in the news and think, well, there's nothing I can do. Doge didn't find it, or, this is what's going to be in the big bill. But a lot of the funding comes and is allocated locally. And so Delaware actually has had a staffing ratio requirement since the year 2000. So 25 years now. Now, do they enforce it? No. They don't even have to fill out a waiver requirement for that. So I actually published a newspaper article basically saying we already have a staffing ratio requirement, because there was a lot of concern that from local legislators that if that federal mandate goes in place, that people are going to lose their homes. Veterans are going to be neglected. And
Man, same stuff every
Yep,
time, man.
every
right.
time.
And when you think about it, when you go out to a restaurant, is every section open always? No. You might only have a few waitresses. So
Right.
you might only be able to sit 8 tables, and you might have to wait for 20 minutes until one of those 8 pops open. But you don't just go sit at a table in another section. You wait.
Yeah, just go uproot someone from their table.
Right.
It just
Right.
doesn't
So
work like that.
I don't know why very vulnerable people who are honestly delicate and deserve to be treated with dignity are any different than me getting my steak order. But there's this perception, like we talked about before, they're old, something's
Right.
going to happen to them anyway. But I don't believe that. I don't believe any human or animal should have to suffer because of their circumstances.
So in Delaware, there's a staffing. So there's laws already on the books. Where have we seen this before,
Oh,
Mark?
dude, this
There's
is
laws.
government.
There's already things on the books.
Mhm.
If they were just enforced, a lot of
Mhm.
these problems, they may not go away, but it certainly wouldn't contribute towards more of them occurring, right?
Right.
To say the least there. So um, I wanted to ask this, which is, you know, I'm trying to think of how I want to ask this one, but this is basically what would your message be to folks out there that may have grandparents or parents in these facilities, if another pandemic was declared? What lessons are there from COVID that
Mhm.
you would relay to folks that are concerned about another pandemic coming and the things that you should be looking out for?
Yeah, so I am working on one federal law. The only one I'm working on with a big group of people, 15,000 people actually. It's called the Essential Caregivers Act, and basically, it's to prevent any family or caregiver from being locked out of these facilities, um, should, God forbid, another pandemic or any reason why they want to lock us out of facilities happen. It's about to be hopefully reintroduced. It was put on hold. It didn't have enough sponsors. It is bipartisan, surprisingly. My state has not signed on to it yet, even though we've met with legislators. But um, I would say you need to be able to get in there no matter what. So getting together with other families who have loved ones in there and getting in contact with your legislator, ideally getting a law on the books before that. I am trying to work on that on the state level. One of the things that I do is I benchmark other states' laws. I put them in a package and hand feed them to legislators and say, this is how you should model. And here's the links. Other people have done it. A lot of states are, don't want to be the first one for some reason or another. So I believe there's 12 states that have some kind of flavor of this Essential Caregivers Act. I believe Texas is one of them, Florida, Illinois, Connecticut. So it's a pretty wild blend, but I would say try to get those laws, on the books, and then if God forbid it does happen, then demand visitation and FOIA requests. I mean, I didn't get I was told we were not allowed in facilities. And 2.5 years later, I get a 400-page email packet to show I was actually allowed. The facility was lying to me. The people
Wow.
in the state were lying to me. But
Amazing, dude. Oh my
yeah, I got
God.
that August of 2023.
Oh, of course. When
After the fact,
after people
yeah, and
start
it's
all
that
the
was a long
panicking
way
start,
back.
they
It was,
start going, well, just forgive us.
come
We
on, it
didn't
was
know.
COVID. We
Right.
didn't
It was a
know.
pandemic,
It was a
Right.
pandemic. What did you
But they're
expect?
still not sold on that it was wrong to lock people out.
Well, of course not.
No.
They can't admit it. Yeah, of course they can't.
But that's one of my continued missions, that hopefully at a federal level and at a state level, we can get that changed, because what has happened, one of the most impactful videos I saw, one of the ladies that is working on this bill, she's from Connecticut. Her mom had dementia, and she has a video through the window of her mom at a facility, and she forgot how to use a straw.
Oh
She
my.
was spinning it around, and she had already been to the hospital for dehydration, and she couldn't remember how to drink. And so her daughter could only watch through the window, and couldn't get anybody to help her mom be able to drink. And so a lot of people will say, well, why didn't you just take them out? That's another comment, in addition to how old was your grandmother? Well, you should have just taken her out. Well, things don't work that easily.
Not
One,
at
you need
all.
to make sure you have a safe environment for that loved one. Two, there might be some family dynamics where people disagree as to the best path. The third, we were supposed to be able to visit my grandmother after she got her second COVID vaccine, which she got her second vaccine on the day she was taken to the hospital for her foot wound, and she died 12 days later. So we were planning on seeing her the next day. But even though she got that, we weren't allowed to go into the hospital for days.
Even after she was vaccinated.
We were locked out of the
Unbelievable.
hospital, even though she was in a room by herself, because she had MRSA, and that's very contagious. So she was in a room by herself, and we were told, you cannot come in here, and you only get iPad privileges, one person per day, if the iPad is charged.
What in the world?
This is
government.
This is
government.
And I
when
found out I read all the medical records as a part of my writing process. I didn't read them all at once, because it's a lot of emotions to handle. There's a lot of forgiveness that I needed to give myself. I needed to protect my mom, because she felt guilty, and she shouldn't feel guilty at all. But it's still crushing, to be honest with you. And so I read the medical records, and I found that the hospital had tied down my grandmother by her wrists and ankles the day that her toe fell off. And I will say, looking at how the facility industry, the long-term care facility industry, has responded versus the hospital is very professional. I talk about this in my book. I let them know 2 years after all this occurred. I wrote them. I was finally able to clear my head enough to speak. And they met with me right away. and they apologized and they said they took my recommendations into consideration and told me exactly what they were doing to help prevent this in the future. So I do want to encourage people, like, even though something might be challenging and you don't have to rush it, they still took me seriously. They were still very kind and they worked on things. And then now I can feel like my grandmother's pain wasn't for nothing with them because they know my grandmother now, you
Right.
know. And so I just want to encourage people, um, even though something's hard, you can make a difference as an individual, no matter what your topic is. But you have to speak up, and doing it in a collected manner, even though it's a difficult subject, I feel like goes a long way with negotiating any kind of changes.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of being able to be effective too, right?
Mhm.
Is being able to cross that barrier. And I would agree with that. The time it takes is the time it takes to be able to get to that point that you're at right now.
Mhm.
So really commend you for that. Very, very honorable, very good message there. Um, I just you know, it's hard not to get we'll probably edit this part out. Part of me just, you get that kind of that violent thought process, you
Yeah, you
know,
want to go and,
because
hey,
it's like,
make this
if
right.
it's if you were a cop, I imagine if you go and you see some of this, first thing you want to do is like, well, who's taking care? Who was in charge of
Who's responsible
taking
for
care of
this?
them?
Right.
Because I'm gonna,
Mhm.
you know,
I'm a-
and then it's like, to what you were saying about, well, why didn't you just take her out? It's stuff like that. It's those type of comments
Mhm.
that make it impossible not to, just react to
Mhm.
people's ignorance when it comes to, having solutions involved. Well, why don't you just, if it's so easy, why don't you just quit? Why don't you just get a, for a situation like this, why doesn't the institution you put them in just do its damn job?
Right.
Why is that not the parameter for the effects of that's the whole point of going to these facilities.
Mhm.
You should be able to trust where you're putting your loved ones
Right.
when they need this type of care, not, well, you should just okay, well, then what's the point of even having why
Right.
do they even exist? If we can all just do this ourselves, what do we need you for?
Right.
What do we need you for? But this day, it's impossible to do a lot of this stuff, especially if you don't have a huge family,
Right.
especially.
oh, yeah.
This is tough. My grandma was taking care of my grandpa in the home, and let me tell you, that was a brutal challenge for my
Mhm.
grandma because very, very stubborn, Hispanic side of the family. They're very they did not like going to the doctors and doing all this. Eventually you had a nurse that would come in and she would help with stuff, but grandpa was getting out in the middle of the night and thinking people were stealing his car, and it's got very exhausting. But the attitude, it was like, we looked at grandma like, man, we don't want her to do this to herself. And then the second that it was even explored, it was clear immediately, like, he ain't gonna be taken care of down here. That was over in that's in Aldine
Oh,
area. So
oof,
that,
it's rough.
the ghetto down here, the nursing homes there, and once it's just, you
Mm,
can forget about it. I wouldn't, no way.
no.
So, no, that's a very good message that you put there. I'll make sure we'll get that in there. What's the I'm trying to think of what else here because this is
Well, you know me, I'm always solutions oriented. So
Mhm.
I think you've done an amazing job of lining out some of the issues.
Mhm.
And what's a little bit terrifying about this, Candace, is that I know what you've lined out here are some of the
right.
Mhm.
Some of them, right?
some of them. There's no telling what all they are. And we've seen the, stories that hit the news and things like that. But for every one of those stories, I imagine there's thousands of
Mhm.
other stories that just go unnoticed for whatever reason.
Mhm.
What do you see as some? solutions? And are the solutions different for the government facilities versus the nonprofit versus the private for-profit? You would be the expert here on this, because I know, because of this situation and what happened to your Memom, that you've dove in politically, and a lot of other, this has become a passionate pursuit of yours to right this wrong or to do something positive about it. What are some of the solutions? What needs to be done?
Yeah, I think first off, getting to the point where everybody can agree we need to do something differently. It's not working from a quality perspective for letting people age with dignity. It's not working for the staff that works there. I don't want them to feel burned out and exhausted and overworked and frustrated and like they aren't trained. And it's not working for taxpayers, to be honest with you. It doesn't work for fiscal responsibility where, you know, shareholders for these private equity firms, you know, there's a 25% profit margin on these facilities. And meanwhile, you're paying certified nursing assistants $10, $12 an hour. That's not right. And I'm not asking them to not be profitable. I'm just asking them to even look at, hey, if you even have less lawsuits, let's take it out where we're not even looking at the person of the resident. Let's just talk about it from a pure business perspective. Less lawsuits, less staff turnover, good training to where people stay and you don't have to worry about hiring more people, hiring enough people. That right there is a good business model that any business, whether you're in manufacturing, law enforcement, whatever you're doing, having people trained appropriately. You know, there are certain things that are special about seniors that people need to be trained, and especially if they happen to have dementia or some kind of other, you know, cognitive illness. Basically, there's certain things that you need to know how to do to protect the resident or patient and protect yourself. And so I think, you know, a lot of the things that I worked on initially are basics, audits. Let's have
Right.
inspections.
Right.
Let's make sure we pay enough people at the state to be able to have that oversight and handle complaints. If somebody is able to find out how to do the complaint process, which is a challenge, then they want that to be looked into. And an interesting thing, I forget what the statistic is, but there's a perception that most of the complaints are not substantiated. Now, why would somebody enter a complaint and go through all of that and lie about it? I'm not saying it never happens, but I would say if it's not the majority of the complaints are founded, then there's a problem in your investigation process. And we went through that with my grandmother, where we filed a complaint. I filed a complaint immediately the day I saw the photo of her foot. And I thought I was filing a complaint because she's going to go back to the facility. I didn't think she was going to die. I just said, well, they got to do better. We're going to file a complaint. Obviously, that's not how that happened. And so we still kept up with the complaint process because we worried about the other people, the people that we had Christmas dinner with at that facility. I love them all. And so we get a call about a year later, and the complaint is closed. They went to the facility. They asked them if they did anything wrong, and they said, no, we didn't do anything wrong. We're closing it. So I said, did you review any medical records? Oh no, we didn't do that. We didn't look at any medical records. So they interviewed the staff. Of course, they're going to say nothing is wrong. And so anyway, going back to it, I think, you know, making sure these inspections, making sure people follow through if you have issues, if you have residents that are found walking the highway, which we've had two in Delaware in this year, where residents are walking along busy highways because nobody knew, and these are residents with dementia. They're just out walking major highways. but do some of the basic things well.
Right.
Train your staff, have enough staff, have some oversight. There is an accreditation program, which a lot of industries, I used to work in the nuclear power industry, they are accredited, education's accredited. The purpose of that is to have access to best practices so you can all learn better faster. Why would anybody not want to do that?
Right.
Yet it's completely vetoed. That was one bill that we were not completely successful on making that mandatory. So I think just doing that, not fighting any improvement and saying, a lot of times I hear, well, we should focus on the good things that happen at the facilities. And there were good things that happened. I have pictures of them. They had a gingerbread making contest. They had, a pumpkin decorating contest. They had a band at 4th of July. Lots of beautiful memories happened there.
We're not talking about complaints about the gingerbread party, are
No.
we?
And really, like,
Nuts.
in serious, they should be complaining about the food more because the food in general is not good.
Oh,
What
it's
you're
probably
paying.
like equivalent to prison food. Matter of fact, depending on a school or prison, one of them might be
Well, it's
better. One of them might be getting better food.
I'm sure it's very high in carbohydrates, which just adds to all the different
Sure.
problems brought on by diabetes and things.
Oh
like
yeah, hypertension, all that. But I think one of the interesting, a person that I've actually studied a lot of the opioid epidemic, in order to try to understand how to convey a strategy against these powerful lobbyists. The nursing home and assisted living industry has extremely powerful lobbyists. They invest a lot of money in this. And so I thought about, the opioid epidemic and families who deal with that. And there's not a lot of talk. There's not a lot of people that necessarily come out. There are some, but there's not a lot of people that will go out and say, my loved one was neglected, because they hear the things like, why didn't you take them out? They were old. They don't want to carry that burden and deal with those kinds of comments. So they say nothing, until I might talk to them about it, or somebody will say, oh, this happened to me. So I know it's common, but there's a former federal prosecutor who is involved in working on senior care regulations and awareness about neglect. And, he has told me that this is as hard of a battle to try to get change as trying to get change for the opioid epidemic.
That means there's some heavy corruption at play.
Well, it's government.
Most likely. I mean, but one of the fascinating aspects to all this is when you're going through the complaint process, an investigation gets, so there's actually no current proactive. And when I think we're talking the same thing when we're saying audit, just check through the facility, check on the patients that are in there. Are they being treated well? Looking for injuries and things like. There's nothing like. Do you have to file a complaint to open an investigation to get that kind of thing, or is there another? Are there third parties that can come and do audits? Or is this all something that has to be initiated on the consumer end?
Yeah. So one of the 6 laws I worked on was to get a frequency requirement for these inspections. So nursing home facilities, those are federally regulated. Assisted living facilities are state regulated. And so CMS, the Center for Medicaid Services, requires an inspection every 12 to 15 months at nursing home facilities. Assisted living facilities, there's no standard. It could vary state to state. They could have no requirements. So I noticed in 2018, the law language changed to regular for timing frequency. And I was like, well, regular isn't defined. That could mean anything. That could mean once every 10 years. I don't know what that means. And so I actually found out that there wasn't enough funding being given to hire enough inspectors to comply with every 12 to 15 months or an annual inspection. And so the director, rather than being dinged, if you will, for never meeting the metric for every year, decided to change it to regular and no more metric. So no
Wow.
more problem. Everything is fixed. So one of the simple bills was changing from regular to 12 to 15 months and then making sure that that was funded appropriately, and it has been, and the state is actually caught up now, thankfully, with the inspections. And so those are state. Now I think they hire contractors, which I'm fine with.
Yeah.
Delaware is a very small state. I don't, as long as somebody's trained, doesn't matter to me who it is, as long as they are doing
Yeah.
their.
Somebody, as long as somebody's doing it.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And I think one of the other things is, are there any current? I know when we last spoke, you had mentioned some pretty. Is there anything you can share with the audience on any current stories, any current horror stories that you're working on that you're privy to? We don't need names or any details like that, but I think some of these stories do help bring light to some of the things that are going on out there. But anything you want to share in that regard that you have your eyes on that you think is would be important to share with the audience?
Sure. So, one of the things that is helpful with my group, I have a team of volunteers in my Delaware Elder Care Advocacy Coalition. We like to stay involved in what's going on both in our state and nationally as far as neglect and issues. And that way we can drive our priorities for what's next in our advocacy campaigns. So, um, obviously there's thousands of stories out there. A recent one that's in the newspaper is a resident was attacked. There was a harmful interaction between another resident in a dementia care unit. This happened last August. So we monitor the newspapers to see what's going on. Very horrible. The lady ended up passing away from her injuries. They had broken 10 of her 24 ribs. And so, but we look at what are some of the systemic issues so that we can help a broader community. And some of the themes in that are they didn't have enough staff. This is all public information from the investigation. There was actually a staff brawl between two people. So they were sent home, and so that left them short staffed that evening. There wasn't required training for dementia care residents for all staff, not publicly shared that they received training on how to comply. Some of these facilities require hourly checks, and this lady had that as a part of her care plan, and that wasn't done. There are cameras in the hallways, and it showed no staff was walking in to rooms. It is under litigation, so we stick to what is on the public, in the papers and what's in public reports and things like that. But there's no shortage of harm, and so we just look for what are some of the themes of things where we can make the most impact to help people, not have to suffer through this.
What would you say are some of the most common overall themes?
I think the pressure wound, like what my grandmother experienced, which pressure wounds can then lead to infections and then you get sepsis. And it's really hard, especially in older people, if you do not identify that somebody is septic quickly. And so that's like a raging, very painful infection that goes throughout your body. I think falls is another very common that some people try to, as we talked about earlier, they try to normalize. Well, old people fall, the seniors fall. That's going to happen. And really, you shouldn't try to normalize people getting hurt. You should be able to set up systems, whether it's making sure their floor is clear, in their facility. If they need help getting dressed, making sure that they get that help. I know in my grandmother's journals, she would say, nobody came to help me get dressed. And if you don't get down to the dining hall, you miss breakfast. That's not enjoyable. So, helping her, and she dressed up every day too. She wore, a pantsuit, slacks, did her hair, her makeup. I mean, it was a process, and she expected people to help her out with that. But yeah, falls, pressure wounds, um, those are two of the bigger, issues that are happening.
And where's the best place that people can find you yourself and your material, but as well as where can they also find to support your advocacy work and some of the things you're working on?
Sure. So I'm my website. It's CandaceEsham.com. Then I publish my newsletter on that website. And even if you're not from Delaware, it'll give good insights as to how to navigate the system in your state. I do talk about federal trends in some newsletters, and it'll give you good insight as to how to navigate the care system. So that's a part of my Delaware Elder Care Advocacy Coalition. I have a Facebook page for that. And also, I can be found on LinkedIn and X as well.
Awesome. And that's X. I see at Candace Esham. So, all right. I think I wanted to make sure I got that one.
Yes.
My hope is that my book helps people either who have been through something with neglect give themselves forgiveness, even though they shouldn't have to.
Right.
But recognize that this isn't your fault. Your loved one should not have suffered. This isn't normal. Even though it's common, it's not, it should not be a normal way to treat a human being. And so that's why I wanted to write my book, is for, giving people hope. Even though it's a hard story, I want people to have hope for how to get involved locally. Don't be overwhelmed by the government process. Trust me, it can be overwhelming. But if you're strategic and you have a great team around you, and you celebrate the small wins with that, you'll keep chipping away at it. And that's what I'm hoping to take my work broader outside of Delaware, even though there's a lot of work to do here. And I appreciate, you guys giving me the opportunity to, expand my outreach. And the article you wrote, Mark, is just.
Was that okay? Was that, and I'm not looking for pats on the back.
Yeah.
Genuine did I paint a good picture there?
You did. It was perfect timing too, because it just, sometimes you can feel like there's so much to do. And did I really, make a difference in something? And then when you reflect on, oh, wow, this is where I started and this is how hard it was to even get here. It's good to have like a reminder, because I'm very proud of my book and what I've done. But then when I hear, the stories that are still happening, I'm like, sometimes it can be a little deflating, and I don't want to feel like a fraud. I'm in no way do I say, am I done? I'm not. We just had a meeting Wednesday night with my group, but your article, I feel like, characterized like just how I feel about my book and the process and my Memom. So it meant a lot. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, then you just made my day. Thank you very much. And I wasn't fishing for a compliment.
Oh, that
No,
was
yeah.
that made me, honestly, this is making me really happy. Right?
Good. No, and there's an important message to this book.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our population now, with all the baby boomers, I'm the very end of the baby boomers, 1964. This issue is only going to get worse.
Yeah.
And I think your book is something that we can really work together on and bring awareness in areas and do things with it that can make a difference. Because it's easy to tell by spending this time with you to understand that you are driven. This is something that you're driven by.
Right.
And so that can become a very powerful. There's synergy here that I think that we ought to take advantage of, and make some positive moves to make some differences here.
No, and it's a heroic endeavor, I think, when you're talking about self-forgiveness for
Mhm.
certain aspects and different things, because it's very easy to talk about it. It's another thing to do it. Forgiveness in general, there's a reason it's a godly thing, because it's
Mhm.
very hard to do, no matter if it's for yourself or somebody else. And I think you've got the tenacity to keep a lot of this stuff going. So it's very, very thankful again that you chose to get published. I know we had a bumpy ride there at the beginning, but I think things
We
will
got it going. We're
Hey,
good.
listen, let me
start
tell you
getting
something.
out there.
Isn't that kind of interesting though? Because anytime anything like this, and Travis, I mean, not to get religious, but let's just say there's something maybe a little bit more than the material here. But yeah, the devil, I think, tries to trip up good things that are coming and stuff. And I'm just really glad that we've made it where we're at here today and doing this, and that you're the very first book
Yeah.
review online that we're doing. And I'm very encouraged, and I think we're going to see some pretty amazing things come out of this.
I think
Yeah.
there's some.
Speaking of religious, in my book, I talk about license plates that I see. I don't know how it is in Texas, but in Delaware, there's a lot of vanity license plates that have
Mhm.
words on it. So the night that I signed with you guys, and I remember Travis, you got on the phone and everything. I was leaving my parents' house, driving back to my house, and the license plate said "Ask God." I have a
Interesting.
picture of it. And so
Give me a
I
little.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that, things happen for a reason and God does have a plan. And the forgiveness part, I struggled with, but actually at a Bible study, I opened up to, some of my colleagues there, and they were like, you have to forgive yourself and others. Otherwise you're going to lose yourself in this. And so, yeah, before I get choked up on that, but I do want to thank you guys, and I'm very thankful. I just appreciate your support. It does mean the world to me, and there's a lot of people that you know have said, "Oh, I wish I knew about your book a year ago." I've had people
Yeah.
say that, and so it means a lot. There's a lot of work to do, but the bigger we can get our message out there, hopefully the bigger changes we can make.
Well, I'm always available to you, Candace. I think it was important because we were talking about like who should we go, who wants to go first?
Yeah.
I was like, well, who's recently, and I was like, I think we need to get Candace
Well,
because
it was just
me and Candace we would do the conversations on the book, and then it would go for an hour.
yeah. Well, because
We
it's so
would be talking.
timely.
Well,
This is
it does coincide with a lot of the different things that we're seeing,
yeah.
and
It's the life issue.
it's the
It's
well, and it's there's a respect element to it
Mhm.
that somebody's gonna have to wipe my ass one day,
right.
Yeah.
and I think a lot of people in my age group, they look at it all the same. They don't. It's like how it does, when it feels that's like one of the devil's tricks when it makes it feel daunting. Like how do I get people in my arena? A lot of people in my age group, I'll tell you, the things they care about: sports,
Mhm.
weed,
Very,
alcohol.
very
I mean, it's like
selfish.
there's very I've had to trim down a lot of what I thought were friends, and it's not in a judgmental fashion. It's I can't get anywhere being surrounded by people that just don't care all the time. You're just
Mhm.
chasing, not caring all the time. But I was talking to Mark. I said, me and Candace, we would talked a lot. We probably get a lot of good uh, getting the camera together and doing this. So I wanted to set it up nice for you.
I like it.
And
And I'm
So
sure Memom is proud.
oh yeah,
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. I'm telling you.
yeah.
yeah. I actually saw the last statistic thing I'll share is um, more people are taking care of elders than children right
I
now.
believe that.
Wow.
No, I believe that. Yeah.
So when and like Mark said, it's only going to, progress
Yeah.
that way because people are having less children.
Baby boomers are
Baby
all.
boomers are, getting up there. And so the time is now to figure this out. And it's not impossible. It's not impossible to treat people well.
Just needs to be prioritized.
No,
It's
and that's
cultural.
like, when you're going through some of the elements of this, the most shocking factor to it is it's the basic stuff.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
very basic stuff that you can get fit, and the fact that you get pushback.
Getting a
I
shower.
you gotta chuckle at it because it's like, there's more energy in not doing anything than
Yes.
actually just doing something about it. That's what's shocking, and all this stuff that we cover, and then we get on here, and then we hear about this stuff, and elevators not working. I mean, it's very, you can understand when it makes you get, when you get riled up about it. It's like you just, nobody wants to empathize until it happens to them, right? So
People are
when it's not
pursuing.
happening to you,
Yeah. And
it's like, oh well, that's a shame, but that's how you can get to those varying degrees where people are just, wow, well, how old was she? And ask
Mhm.
those questions. I'll tell you something, that would just, you know, you must have a lot of grace. Uh, because my pops passed, I experienced, similar type of, oh, well, it's been 3 months, or it's like, nobody has any idea how long it takes and what the circumstances are with anybody who loses anyone.
Mm-mm.
So you got to respect that. That was a big part of, when I know that this book was coming, it was like, hey, that's what, anyway, not to vent some of the frustrations on there, but it's a shame, a lot of the aspects to the culture, but it's like you said, there's a lot of work to be done. I think this is good. This is good. It's good content. It's good content because it's valuable. I mean, there's meaning behind it. There's solutions that can be driven, from this kind of thing. So I would definitely say don't be a stranger. We'll probably have you back on the show, and I don't know, who knows? Maybe pop in for a live segment. We talk to when
Yeah.
me and Mark are really cutting up. I'll just warn you in advance. But
Yeah.
no, well, we're trying to do this. We got to think about whoever we're
Yeah.
going to interview next. See,
And
our authors do well. When you guys do well, we'll do well.
Right.
Exactly. That's what we all want. I mean, there's like multiple reasons for sharing the
There's
message.
a lot of win-wins.
Yeah.
Yeah, that we
So-
want to pursue.
And that's what I talk about. I recently posted on LinkedIn with my negotiation class that I took with my MBA. It's called Expand the Pie. If you can walk away from a negotiation where everybody wins, and I didn't come up with this, another author, came up with that, but where you can come up with a negotiation where everybody wins, everybody comes away and said, I feel like I got what I wanted out of this. That's exactly where you want to be. And that's how I frame the legislation I work on. And that's how I try to just conduct myself. And it's not a, calculating manner. I really do. Why wouldn't I want people to win? I don't want to take something from someone.
Well, and seeing these are, the ability to negotiate and having these different aspects on what you're negotiating. I mean, these are tools that everybody needs because everything you
Yeah.
do requires some form of negotiation, whether you're a 2-year-old that, only wants to eat, what is it, bread right now. There's some haggling that gets involved because he's got to expand his palate. And if he fights me on it a little bit. So, there's some, but it's very helpful stuff. Would you say LinkedIn is your most active social media platform?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is where I share the most. I'm connected with a lot of interesting people, both senior care advocates as well as regulatory compliance professionals and nuclear power professionals. So it's been really great to see the variety of ways I know people who have become interested in the work I do, volunteer work I do, and my book. So I mean, people from all versions of my life, have been able to connect with it. So that's been the positive thing. You know, I want to get out there more, but the feedback I've gotten is exactly what I've wanted people to feel like when they read my book. So
Well, I think once
awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Travis. And
you're welcome.
It's an honor. I appreciate it. It means a
yeah,
lot.
this was fun.
No, God
Thanks for
bless you.
joining us.
God bless you,
We'll be in touch,
Candace.
Candace. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Have a great weekend.
You too.